In this video, I want to include everything you need to know about applying to Oxbridge all the way from the start to the finish. It's going to be quite long, but I'll get through it as fast as I can. So starting off, what is Oxbridge? Oxbridge refers to two universities, Oxford and Cambridge, which are separate but similar in many ways. They're both very, very old, like 800 years old. And they have a lot of very prestigious people who studied there. A lot of very famous discoveries and inventions occurred at Oxford and Cambridge. Good. Next point is that Oxford and Cambridge consist of colleges. They are both collegiate universities. And what that means is that there is no central university. There's 30 or so colleges which make up each university. A college is basically where you eat and sleep. It's your accommodation and cafeteria in a way. But when you apply to Oxford and Cambridge, you need to choose a college. But college and course are independent in the sense that if you study at a specific college, you go to the same lectures and the same classes as other people. So in that sense, college and course are separate, although some colleges won't offer some courses, but most colleges offer most courses. Colleges don't generally specialize in subjects, but some colleges might have a reputation for being very good at specific subjects, like Trinity College Cambridge is very famous for its maths, and Corpus Christi College Oxford is well known for classics, for example. But in general, college and course, they're not related. Okay, next thing, who should apply to Oxbridge? There's no standard formula for what kind of person should get into Oxbridge, but I would say there's a few traits which a lot of successful Oxbridge applicants have in common, and those traits include being passionate, being driven, being proactive, academic. What else? Yeah, that's it. Passionate, proactive, motivated. Those are the kind of people who get into Oxbridge. There are a lot of stereotypes about the kind of people who get into Oxbridge, such as rich, posh, white people. But that is not really true. You do find those people, they do definitely exist. But there is a wide variety of people at Oxbridge. There's people who come from middle class backgrounds, working class, people who might have been on free school meals, or even people who might have been refugees at some point. So you've got a wide variety of people, and it's not just the same kind of posh white people, although they do often come here as well. I would say that if you're unsure about applying to Oxbridge because you don't fit in, I would say don't worry, because there will be people like you. You won't be out of place. If you want to study at Oxbridge just for the sake of studying at Oxbridge, you shouldn't apply, because usually people like that don't get in. The people who get in really want to study their subject. They don't want to just get into Oxbridge for the sake of getting in. I would say don't apply just for the sake of getting into Oxbridge. You should apply if you genuinely want to study your subject, and it shouldn't be about just being able to flex and say, I study at Oxbridge. You don't need to be a genius to get into Oxbridge. There's a saying that there's two kinds of people at Oxbridge, and those are the geniuses and the people who have just worked hard. And I'd say it's more of a spectrum. You do have people who are just geniuses, but also you do have people who are relatively average, but they've just worked very hard and worked very well. And you've got people who are in between. So if you're not a genius, you can still get in. You just probably have to work a bit harder. And if you are a genius, you probably have to do a bit of work, but you might find it easier to get in. And that's because everyone who does get in does have to do work. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you will still have to do work. And the thing about Oxbridge, which really makes it more difficult, is that the workload is very, very, very intense. Imagine A-levels, but times 5. I don't mean to scare you, but it's kind of like that. Okay, Oxford or Cambridge, which one should you apply to? I would say look at the courses. You want to apply to the course which most suits you. Oxford and Cambridge have different courses. For example, at Cambridge, there's no biology, but there is something called natural sciences, which is what I studied. And at Oxford, there's biology, but no natural sciences. I looked at the two courses and I found that natural sciences suited me more, which is why I applied for natural sciences and I didn't apply to Oxford, which I was considering applying to. Additionally, you might want to visit both places to see which one you like more, and also if there's specific facilities in the towns you want, take those into consideration too. Oxford is bigger than Cambridge. It's more of a city, whilst Cambridge is more of a town. So if you want somewhere a bit bigger, go for Oxford, a bit smaller, go for Cambridge. What should you apply for? I'd say look at the websites for Oxford and Cambridge and see what courses they have to offer. You probably have a vague idea what you want to study, especially with something like medicine. You need to be thinking about that way in advance. But if you're not sure, then have a look at the courses, because there's a lot of courses you might not have heard of. Like at Cambridge, there's these courses called land economy, for example, or psychological and behavioural sciences. These are quite niche courses which you often won't have heard of. So do your research and see what courses are available, see what courses you'd be interested in, and see what courses you're eligible for, because you need to be doing the right A-levels, for example. When should you start thinking about applying? You don't need to be thinking your whole life about getting into Oxbridge. You don't need to spend your whole GCSEs with Oxbridge in mind. I would say that most people who get into Oxbridge are not the people who are obsessed with Oxbridge for years and years, but they tend to be people who've just been very academic throughout their whole studies, like at school, and they've got good grades. And in year 12, they look into applying to Oxbridge. And I would say that's what I did. It was in November in year 12 when at a school assembly, one of my teachers said, in 1 year's time, you will have applied to university. And that's when suddenly I realized, okay, I need to get my stuff together. And that's when I started like looking at universities. And it was only a couple months later when I went to the open days at Oxford and Cambridge that I really started like looking into which one I wanted to study at. And it was only like a couple months before the application deadline that I chose to apply to Cambridge. And it was in summer between year 12 and 13 that I started drafting my personal statement. Moving on, when should you apply? So the absolute deadline for applying to Oxbridge is 15th of October. Obviously, you need to be thinking about your application before that. You want to have everything ready by the 15th. And ideally, I'd submit my application at least a week or so beforehand, but usually schools have internal deadlines before that. Like at my school, the internal deadline for Oxbridge application was end of September. So submit it before the 15th of October, but you've got to be like getting your application sorted well before that. Also, when your application is sent off doesn't affect your chances of being accepted as long as it's before the deadline. So if you send it a week in advance or 2 months in advance, your chances of being accepted will not be affected. So UCAS application, that is an important part of your Oxford application or any UK university application. It's mostly just filling out a form like which subjects you did at what level and what grade you got. But you also have the chance to do your personal statement, which will be a pretty big part. Just to add also, in your UCAS application, you can put qualifications like music grades as well, for example. So it's not just A-levels and GCSEs. Personal statement. So like I said, that's something you do in your UCAS application. And that is a fairly important part of your application often because it's a chance for you to stand out from the other applicants. You have up to 4,000 characters and 47 lines to convince the reader that you deserve to get the place that you're applying for. That is only about 650-ish words, and that is not a lot of words. Again, there's no one-size-fits-all perfect personal statement. So personal statements vary a lot in what they're like because they're personal. If you want to know what kind of stuff to write in your personal statement, maybe have a look at my channel where I interviewed Cambridge and Oxford students who got accepted and they talk about what they put in their personal statements. My general advice for writing a personal statement is the following. Write down everything you can think of which is relevant, both academic and extracurricular. And once you've got everything written down, you want to start structuring it in a logical sequence and you want to make it into very good English and you want to cut it down until you reach the character limit. Make sure that you really proofread it properly because you don't want to waste a single character, not even an extra comma or extra space should be in your personal statement. You want to be showing it to other people, your friends, your family, your parents, your teachers, and you want to get their feedback. Obviously, you don't need to do what they suggest, but it can be helpful to get feedback from other people. Keep in mind that your personal statement, it will change over time. The first draft will be very different to the last draft, and you'll just be changing it and changing it and changing it over time. And you've got to be able to be open-minded about changing it, so you don't want to just be stubborn and stick to the original structure, and you should be open to changing the structure as the personal statement develops. Okay, the next thing is college choice, but I need to go somewhere and I'll be back later. Okay, right, I'm back. I just had a ceremony, which is why I'm dressed up. But the next thing I wanted to talk about was college choice. So when you apply to Oxford or Cambridge, you have to choose a college. Alternatively, you can make an open application, which means you're allocated a random college. But I don't recommend you do that for reasons that I will explain a bit later. But how do you choose a college? I think there's various things you should consider. First of all, eligibility. Some colleges are only for women, some colleges are only for mature students, mature meaning you're like over 21 and you get in. Some colleges don't offer some courses, so look at what courses are offered by the different colleges. And then you can consider stuff like size, how big it is in terms of area, or also how many people there are there, depending on what kind of thing you like. Look at its location, whereabouts is it relative to the places you want to go to. Like for example, if you want to be close to your department, then you might want to take that into consideration. Appearance, you want it to probably look nice, so have a look at it, see if it's something that you think looks nice. Facilities, just see what facilities it has to offer. Look at the accommodation that they have to offer. If you have special requirements or if you want a special type of accommodation, then see what kind of accommodation they have to offer you. You might want to take into account the reputation of the college. Some of them have very sporty or maybe academic reputations, which might be something you care about. There might be specific academics which you might be big fans of and therefore you might want to apply. to those colleges, or if you're like a big fan of page Y, you might want to apply to Jesus, for example. And a very important thing to consider is entry criteria, because some colleges might have slightly different entry criteria compared to other colleges. Like they might require you to do a different combination of A-levels. And although this is rare, you should definitely do your research to double check that the college you're applying to, it has the entry criteria that you meet. Some colleges might have additional exams as well, like engineering at St. John's College, Cambridge. I think you need to sit STEP, the math exam, which most colleges don't make you do. But I will also add that college choice isn't necessarily that important because you'll probably have a great time wherever you go to. But if you have preferences, then might as well take those into consideration. You might also want to consider how wealthy the college is, because a wealthier college tends to, let's say, be more generous with money, might have cheaper rent. So I'd say in general, it's nicer to go to a wealthier college. When you're applying to a college, you might be tempted to look at the admissions statistics to help you choose which college to apply to, but I don't think that's a good idea, and here's why. A lot of these numbers in terms of how many students apply to each college each year for each course, they can be very, very small and can be quite hard to therefore predict what these numbers will be over time. There's no guarantee that the admission statistics will over time be constant. When I applied, there's a massive spike in the number of applicants to Jesus, and I couldn't have predicted that based on the admission statistics. Additionally, the admission statistics tell you how many people apply, but don't tell you the quality of the applicants, and that's ultimately what matters. If you got 1,000 bad applicants versus 10 good applicants, you'll probably be more likely to get in if you're competing with those 1,000 bad applicants. So it's more about the quality of the applicants rather than the quantity. However, if there's more applicants, then there probably are more good applicants. But at the same time, if you're dealing with small numbers, like 8 to 10 people for like a specific course at a specific college, then it's quite hard to predict the quality of those applicants. Additionally, colleges won't accept you even if you're the only applicant. They won't accept you just because you applied. They'll only accept you if you're good enough to get in. And if you look at the admission statistics, you might find that in some years, in some colleges, one person might have applied to a course and they might have not got in. And that shows you they won't let you in even if you're the only person who's applied. Additionally, there's something called the pool system, which kind of balances out the effect of different number of applicants applying to different colleges every year. And the way this works is that after the interview, if a college thinks you're good enough to get in but they don't have space for you, they'll put you in the pool. And then other colleges, if they want you, they'll pick you out of the pool and they might give you an offer. And that is called the winter pool. And quite a lot of people, they go through this process to get in even though they applied to a different college. Additionally, there's also a summer pool, which is the same thing but in summer. And it's when you just miss your offer, but you might be good enough to get in and other colleges might still give you a place. So just to clarify, the chances of you being accepted into Cambridge shouldn't be affected by your college choice unless there's different entry requirements by the college. And that is something that the university itself says. However, there's probably a higher chance of you being pulled if you applied to a more popular college, but that shouldn't affect your chances of getting in. I think the bottom line is this: apply to a college that you want to study at and just make sure you meet the entry criteria. Also, I mentioned earlier you could do an open application, which is when you get allocated a random college, but I don't recommend doing this. So the open applications, they are not randomly allocated. They're allocated based on colleges which might not have that many applications that year. So in general, you'll be allocated to the less popular colleges where they've received few applications. And although you might have a good time at those colleges, you probably will, those colleges tend to be the ones which are more further out and less wealthy. So I think there are various disadvantages to going to colleges which tend to get a lot of open applications. And colleges like Murray Edwards College or Girton, they take the majority of the open applications. And Murray Edwards is quite a less wealthy college that's for women only, and Girton is a very far out college. And although they're both nice, they might not be what you want. Also, I did some statistical analysis and I found that if you do an open application, you're significantly more likely to be allocated to a less wealthy college. And like I said earlier, I think there's quite a few advantages to going to a wealthy college, like cheaper rent, for example. So I would say that if you can't choose a college, then you can just randomly choose a college, which I think is a better way than doing an open application. If you're still not sure about how to choose a college, I've made a video on that, and I've also made a whole flowchart which helps you choose a college at Cambridge. Okay, so once you've chosen your college in your UCAS application and you send it off, you might have to do an additional form called the SAQ. This is only for Cambridge, and what this is just a few more questions. And it might have questions such as, what have you covered in school so far, like AS, in year 12, and so far in year 13. And that will help the interviewers choose what to ask you about in the interview. You also have the option to do an additional personal statement, and it is optional. I did not fill it out. Many people did not fill it out, so you don't need to do it, but you have the choice to do so. I've heard that apparently humanities students tend to do it more than science students, but again, some people do it, some people don't. But it's an opportunity for you to talk about why you think the course at Cambridge is good for you. And it's another opportunity, in addition to the personal statement, to explain why you deserve to get in. So after the UCAS application and SAQ in the case of Cambridge, you have entrance exam. These entrance exams, they will vary depending on the course you're applying to. I think most courses, or maybe all courses, have an entrance exam, but you need to do your research to see what you have and when and how to prepare, etc. But they can be relatively important, especially nowadays when a lot of grades are just predicted, like because of Corona. A lot of GCSE naval grades are predicted, and that's not really a lot to go on. And these entrance exams, therefore, are an opportunity for you to show that you really are good enough to get in. So I would say definitely try to do well in entrance exams, and they will look at the entrance exam scores when they decide who gets in, who doesn't. But if you don't do well, then you could still get in. Like, it's not as if you fail one bit and you'll never get in. It's more of they consider your application holistically. They look at different aspects of it. So if you do bad in one part but really well in others, you can still get in. But obviously, if you can do well in the entrance exam as well, that would be very good. For many courses, they're in November. Like for my course, the natural sciences entrance exam was at the start of November, but different courses might have it at different times. And if you do medicine, then you've got all the BMAT stuff to worry about. In terms of preparation, I think the best way is to go through the specifications, see what the format of the exam is, look at what you're expected to know. Usually they'll have a syllabus, and I'd say go through the syllabus, learn what you need to know, and then do past papers. I think that's one of the best ways to prepare for the entrance exam in general. Cool. And then after the entrance exam, you might be invited to an interview. Interviews are normally held in early December. For Cambridge, most people who apply get an interview. About 80% of applicants. Whilst at Oxford, it's a bit lower. It's like 60% or something like that. But it does vary by course. And normally they are in person. Because of COVID, they were online last year. And I think it's currently unclear whether they'll be in person this year, but they could be and they might not be. It's not clear yet. But the interview can be a scary bit of the Cambridge application, Oxbridge application. Here's my first tip for preparing for the interview, which is to make sure you know everything on your application. Make sure you know everything that's in your personal statement, your UCAS application, the SAQ, if you did it. If they ask you about anything in your application, you want to be able to talk about it. And although it's possible they might ask you nothing about your application, be prepared in case they do ask you something. Half of one of my interviews was based around something I wrote about in my personal statement. Additionally, your school will have written you a reference. If you can see a reference, that is very good because it might contain stuff which you might not have expected, and they might ask you about that, and it's good if you are slightly prepared for what they might ask you about. For example, in one of my interviews, the first question they asked was about something that was in my reference, and I had a chance to look at my reference, so I was slightly prepared to answer the question. But if I hadn't known that that thing was in my reference, I would have had a much tougher time in my interview. So in addition to knowing your application, you should know the format. You'll be told in advance what the format of your interview will be. It'll be something like 2 interviews, maybe 3, maybe 1. They usually tend to be 20 or 30 minutes each. For some courses, they might make you do a few questions immediately beforehand, or like they might make you read a poem, or they might make you answer some questions. It varies, but the point is they'll tell you what the format is, and you just need to be prepared to deal with that format. I think in preparation for the interview, you should do a few of the following things. Mock interviews are very, very useful, and I think the best people to ask for mock interviews are teachers, but you can also ask other people, and I think they're a great way to prepare. And during the interview, I think what is very, very important as well is to think out loud. Think out loud, talk about your thought process, because ultimately that's what they kind of want to see. They want to see how you think. And it's really not about getting the right answer. It's really not. It's about how you think, and they want to see that you're receptive to the Oxbridge style of teaching. One of the things which makes Oxbridge stand out is what they call the supervision system at Cambridge, or the tutorial system at Oxford. They're the same thing. And what those are those small classes like 1-on-1 or 2-on-1. And in those classes, you're discussing stuff with your supervisor or tutor. And it's very specific to Oxbridge. And they want to see that you're receptive to this style of teaching, and that's what the interview helps them do. So you should think out loud, so then they can see that you're receptive, you're listening to their ideas, because they're going to be asking questions which you won't be able to answer. And what you're expected to do is be like, accepting the help that they're trying to give you. They're going to be questions which will be too difficult for you and you won't be able to answer them, but they're going to help you. They're going to guide you to an answer. And again, it's not about getting the right answer, but it's about how you think. So if you're in a position where they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, that is normal. And I suggest you answer something like this. I don't know, but could it have to do with X or Y or Z? So you can say, you don't know something, but you can at least try and suggest what the answer is, and they will help you get to somewhere based on that. I think in addition to mock interviews, a good way to prepare is to kind of just read around your course. Reading important books in the field can be very helpful. And also, if you're doing the relevant A-level subjects, I think it's good to just revise what you've learned already, like year 12 content, and also maybe read ahead a bit on like year 13 content. I think I applied for like biological and natural sciences, and I think reading ahead in biology A-level would have been helpful for my interview. So consider doing that, but it depends on like what you're applying for exactly. It might not be applicable for what you're applying for. Additionally, I think you should try researching your interviewers in advance. You'll be told who will be interviewing you. And what you can do is look them up and see what they are specialists in. So then you're just aware at least who they are and what they are experts in. Because imagine they ask you about a specific topic which they happen to be experts in. You don't want to be caught out. What you can also do is plan something to talk about. For example, in my interview, I had the opportunity to talk about a project I did at school, and being prepared to talk about it was very, very helpful. And they saw that I was genuinely very interested in science by doing so. So if you can, I'd suggest think about something you could talk about if you get the opportunity. Another thing that people often ask is, what do you wear for your interview? And I think it's really not that big of a deal. A lot of people go for something quite smart or casual. I wore a kind of suity tie kind of thing, but you can go something more casual than that. So don't feel as if you need to dress up. It doesn't really matter what you wear, just don't come naked or wear something offensive. So I'd say don't really worry about that. It's not about what you wear, it's about how you think. Another thing I suggest is if you get the opportunity to come to Oxford or Cambridge for your interview, enjoy it. You'll be visiting a really cool place and it'll be really pretty, and you'll get free food and free accommodation too maybe. So I'd say enjoy the experience, because unfortunately most people who get an interview won't get in. But at least enjoy the experience. If you want to hear more about interview experiences, I've done loads of videos with people at Oxford and Cambridge where they talk about their interview experiences. So have a look at those and you might get more of an idea of what the interview experience might be like. Additionally, I did a video with an admissions tutor at the University of Cambridge. He also does interviews and he gives you a lot of helpful advice about preparing for the interview. Okay, so after you do your interview, that's like in December, then you won't hear anything until about January, mid-January-ish, you'll get an offer or a rejection if you haven't been rejected already. I think it's about a fifth people on average who get an offer. And if you do get an offer, well done. The offer will usually be the standard offer. At Cambridge, the standard offer for science is A star, A star, A. For humanities is A star, AA. And at Oxford, it's typically AAA for humanities and A star, AA for science. But those do vary. I think some courses at Oxford now also have A star, A offers. But sometimes they might give you higher offers. Like there are people who get 3 A-star offers. My offer was A-star, A-star, AA because I was doing more than 3 A-levels. So the offers do vary, but they'll typically be based around the standard offer. These offers are usually conditional because you need to say your A-levels if you're still in year 13. If you've already sat your A-levels and you're applying in your gap year, then you'll probably get an unconditional offer, in which case you're sorted. But most people will be getting a conditional offer. In terms of how they decide who gets an offer, like I said, they look at applications in a holistic manner, which means they take many, many things into consideration. They will look at your grades, they'll look at your personal statement, your reference, your interview performance, your entrance exam, all of that they'll look at, and then based on that, they'll make an offer. And if you do well in all of those things, that's great. If you don't do well in some of them, you could still get in, but if you consistently don't do well, then you're probably unlikely to get in. In terms of the GCSE results you need, most people who get into Oxford tend to have mostly A stars at GCSE, but you don't need to have all A stars. And there are people who might have only very few, like one of my housemates here, he's only got 3 A stars at GCSE and he still got in. So you don't need to have all A stars, but most people who do get in do have mostly A stars at GCSE. It's possible that the college you applied to didn't give you an offer, but instead you get an offer from another college, which is because the first college you applied to didn't have enough space. And quite a few people do experience this, and it tends to happen when you apply to a very popular college and you tend to go to a less popular college. But sometimes it works in the opposite direction as well, actually. So there's no like definite guarantee that you'll go to like a less nice college. So once you've got the offer, what you can do is then work hard to meet that offer. Hopefully this year you'll have the chance to actually sit your exams instead of getting predicted grades. But yeah, just work hard to meet your offer, and that'd be very good. With some courses like maths at Cambridge, you have to sit the STEP exam, and that is very important for maths. In fact, most people who get an offer for maths, they miss their STEP offer because it's such a hard exam. But most people just have to meet their A-level offer, and that's it. So after exams, the next important thing is results day. This is when you get your A-level results, and this is when you find out if you got into Oxbridge or not. If you get the grades, then you get accepted, then you're sorted. Well done. If you just miss your offer, you might still be let in. You should maybe call them up as soon as you can and be like, hey, this happened. If you're very, very close, they'll probably still let you in. But if you weren't that close, what might happen is they might put you in the summer pool, so another college might accept you. But if you're quite a bit off and you've got no excuse, no extenuating circumstances, then you'll probably be rejected. But in fact, most people who get an offer do tend to get in, except in maths at Cambridge in particular, only about half people who get an offer get in because just the entrance exam is so difficult. So if you do get in, then congratulations, you've gone into Oxbridge and you'll start your term in October. And you might be set work to do beforehand, but usually it's not much, and most colleges don't really do that. But otherwise, I just say enjoy the summer, and then you get to start Oxbridge. When I got into Cambridge, I wasn't sure if I needed to prepare before I started my first term, but I really didn't need to, so don't worry. And if they set you some work, then you can do that, but otherwise don't worry. And if you've been rejected, then I'm sorry to hear that. I've got a few suggestions and things to say. What I suggest is you ask for application feedback. It can be very helpful to find out where you went wrong or where they thought your application was not strong enough. I think that can be very helpful for the future if you apply again or you want to just generally know what went wrong. What you can also do is apply for adjustment, which is when you do better than expected in your results, meaning that you're eligible to get into Oxbridge. I think that at the moment only Cambridge does it, and it's only if you've been interviewed before, so not everyone can do it, but double check that in case it changes. But from what I understand, currently it's quite limited who can do that. Another thing you can do is take a gap year and reapply, and that is surprisingly common. Quite a lot of people do take a gap year and reapply, particularly if their grades turned out better than expected. So that is an option as well. Additionally, you can apply for postgraduate studies. I'm right now a postgrad at Cambridge, and a lot of people do apply after not getting in the undergrad, so that is an option as well. But if you don't get in, I do have to say it's not the end of the world. Like, there's a lot more to life than getting into Oxford or Cambridge. And the people who are really obsessed with getting in, the people who've been spending years and years preparing and thinking about it, they often don't tend to get in because they just are too obsessed with getting into Oxbridge and kind of lose sight of what gets them in, which is being academically driven and passionate about their subject. But I will also add the application process is not fair because it is ultimately subjective and is quite hard to objectively determine how good an applicant is. When they give you an offer, they give it based on academic potential, and measuring academic potential is really not that easy. So you might be rejected even though you might have done very, very well. There's people who do get in who might not do that well. So the admission process is not perfect. Like, they do make mistakes, and if you do slip through the net, then that is very unfortunate. So if you don't get accepted, it's not necessarily because you weren't good enough. You might have just got unlucky. So that is another thing to bear in mind. Okay, I think I've covered most things I wanted to cover. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I've got loads of other videos which go into more detail about what I've talked about, so consider looking at those. And yes, bye-bye.